Well, hello. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time in the world it may be, in whatever part of the world you might be in. Lovely to have you. I'm Tad. I'm going to be reading some stuff. First, I'm going to chat a little bit. Actually, first, I'm going to try and figure out where the focus went on my camera. Oh well. Not that there's, not that huge detail of my face is going to do anybody any particular good, so we won't insist on it. Anyway, hello. It's good to see you. I am here. It is just about a minute after 1 a.m. my time. So, whatever part of the world you may be in, you can adjust accordingly. As I said, I'm going to be reading first. God, is there anything I need to bring anybody up to date on? No, we're having our last immediate family birthday for a while tomorrow. One of our young people, Tyler, is having a birthday. So we've got various things going on about that. Other than that, nah, not really. We're just hanging. We're hanging. I'm working. I think at this point now, Into the Narrow Dark is finally completely out of my hands. I've done the acknowledgments, I've done the dedication. If you had anything to do with the production of Into the Narrow Dark and I didn't remember you, I apologize in advance. I tried to mention everybody that played a part in the book. And because that it was the what we call the front matter of the book, which is not just the dedications, but it's the synopsis. And I wrote an author's note explaining for people who might not know, which actually there are a few who will pick up the books without knowing the whole history of what's happened with it. So I explained that this was actually at one point the first half of a longer volume, and stuff like that. So that is finally out of my hands. I can go back to Navigator's Children with a clean conscience and finish it up. Yes, I am wearing a new shirt. This was a belated birthday shirt. Belated in the sense that I was told about it on my birthday, but it didn't arrive till some days afterward because, March is crazy. March is a crazy birthday month. It's my mom's birthday. It's Tyler's birthday. It was my birthday a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, a couple weeks ago. And by the way, thank you all of you who came by on social media and left a birthday message. Unfortunately, how things work for me these days is I just simply cannot acknowledge all of them. Even though it's not that many. It's not like there's tens of thousands. I'm not, some young, happening artist or something, musician or whatever. But even a few hundred of them, it's just like the repetitive stress thing of running the stuff up and down and up and down and all that, and it just is painful. And I'm trying to save my wrists as much as possible for writing, not just for the sake of my audience, although obviously my readers are very important to me, but also for the sake of paying the bills, which is also very important. So, anyway, was there anything else I was going to tell about? Did I have any stories that I wanted to relate? No, we've had a nice week here. Really, it's the first week of spring, and it's been kind of acting like it. The weather's been nice. I won't dwell on it because I know some of you are still in places where spring is only a distant hope. At least the spring weather. I mean, you can't stop the march of the calendar, really, but I realize for many people it's still a nasty, unpleasant, cold time of the year. Although some people like that, so props to you folks too. You folks who like cold weather, if you're still having it. So yeah, just hanging out, trying to keep the house running more or less, and we're in the middle of various transitions. Our kids are at an age where starting to think about moving out and where they're going to be going to school next year and et cetera, et cetera. So we've got a lot of that going on. Things are a bit confusing that way. Two of them were out this weekend visiting a potential college site, and just got back today. So we were all kind of checking in on that and how was it and what did you think and et cetera, et cetera. But really, honestly, it's been that and work all week of various kinds. So not much to report. So as a matter of fact, then that being the case, and since I can't think of any clever stories to tell, or in fact any stories to tell at all, I probably have to quit being a writer now because I've run out of stories. Anyway, while I'm on the camera here, the whatever, yeah, it's a camera. I will at least say hello to the people who have checked in so far, and then we'll get on with the reading. So I won't cut as much out of my normal reading time as I usually do with my jibber jabber. Anyway, so Rosalba is first on top of the list. And so, hello, Rosalba. Good morning to you. Ronnie, good morning. Nice to have you. Holger, good to hear from you in Waldesruhe. And Holger says, looks forward to greetings to all parts of the world. Look forward to a nice hour here in the circle. A bus ride. Yeah, Holger is commenting on a statement I made about how lucky I am with my readers and people like that, which I am. They're always a next great, a next. They are always a next level bunch of great people, as far as I'm concerned. I really, honestly, I don't think I've ever met a reader of mine that I wasn't, first of all, comfortable with and didn't enjoy talking to, even when we weren't talking about me or my books, just chatting with, hanging out with. And yes, Ron, thank you for the shirt comment. As I mentioned, this was a birthday shirt. Wouter says, good morning, all. When I grabbed my copy of River Blue Fire, Wouter writes, I realized this would translate into Fleuve Feu Bleu in French, which I fortunately did not. Yes, in France is published in 8 parts. Yeah, now that is a tad trilogy. Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of the problems, of course. I write in English, which is, believe it or not, a fairly compact language compared to some of the languages it gets translated into, German being an obvious example. And but then there's also the thing with foreign rights publications, books that are published in other than the original language and have to be translated, that they're more expensive to produce. And as a result, the publishers often will chop them up into smaller pieces. First of all, so they don't have to wait so long for the translation. Also, because they're taking less of a financial risk with the book if it's cut up into pieces. So that's what's going on. But I too am glad that they didn't call it Fleuve Feu Bleu. Even just saying it kind of, it makes your face all much as I love French and the French language. Yeah, that's one that probably wouldn't have been a great translation of the title. Suzanne says morning from Yorkshire, and I say good morning Yorkshire. And here's someone else from Yorkshire, Mark, who says morning Tad, morning everyone. The sun is shining in Yorkshire. Hooray! Glad to hear it. Get out, enjoy the moors. Have a good day. Wouter says also, good evening. And yes, that's the one I already saw. Kristen says hello. Hello to you, Kristen. Lovely to see you. Petra, checking in from sunny Berlin. Christina and Petra are sitting on the couch to listen together. So how nice. Thank you. Nice to have you with us. Anamika, good morning. Chris, good morning. Good to see you. And Ilva is also in sunny Berlin. Yes, I know. I saw that you met Holger. That was very cool. And thank you for the shirt compliment. And yes, I'm glad you are having sunny weather in Berlin. Very nice. Now Holger and them, they're all just talking to each other outside about meeting outside. Jessica, hello, good morning. Time shift arrived in Germany as well. Yeah, I know. I'm not in favor. Okay, and then Petra and Ilver talking to each other. Holger's talking to Chris. Okay, guys, I could just sit here and let you guys chat. That would be okay. That would be a lot easier on me. I wouldn't have to try and do all these accents I'm not really capable of doing. Anthony, hello. Checking in from beautiful Tokyo where the sakura are blooming. I assume that the sakura are the plum blossoms. I'm assuming, maybe incorrectly, or the cherry blossoms, rather, to be more. We used to have this really interesting thing in our old house. Our driveway was on a slight incline. It wasn't flat. It was slightly inclined from the bottom of the driveway up to the top. And there were 3 plum trees. No, 2 apricots and a plum tree. And they were lined up along the side of the driveway with about 10 feet between each of them. But the interesting thing is every year they would bloom in order from bottom to top, as if the minute difference in altitude between, which was, 6 inches or something between each one in terms of actual altitude. Like I said, it's about 10 feet difference, but about 6 inches in altitude because of the rise of the driveway. and they would always bloom in the same order, which I found really fascinating. That would have such an effect, if that's what it was. May have been something else. They may have just been difficult and ornery and going like, I'm not blooming till he blooms. You know, I don't know. I don't speak tree. Anyway, so excuse me. And so I see, yes, Ilva and Petra are now talking. And Renee, hello, Renee. I'm sorry you couldn't sleep, but you're very welcome. And Suzanne says she was on the moors in Yorkshire yesterday, a spell in this spell of good weather. Excellent. Cannot tell you how pleased I am to hear that. Yorkshire's beautiful, and the moors in particular are absolutely stunning. Deb and I, if possible, the next time we get to England, are actually planning a trip there. Jeremy, no, I know you can't be responsible. Sounds like a cool day, though. Anyway, very, 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 very good to see you. I completely understand if you have to peg out early. This is, of course, technically it's the European edition. So I never hold it against any of my friends who are sharing the continent with me over here for pegging out early. And you certainly have a good reason for it. Anyway, so okay, was there anything else? I'm always really pleased, by the way, when friends of mine or readers of mine, and it's hard to draw a line between them for me, but when friends of mine or readers of mine actually get to know each other and become friends, and of course with the tadwilliams.com board over and its predecessor, the Shadow March board, we've been around for so long now that we've had marriages and babies. Not me, I have not fathered any children on the board, but people have met on the board and developed relationships and married and had kids and all kinds of stuff. So that's just so cool. I cannot ever get over how nice that is to be involved in that way in people's lives, even if it's peripheral. And obviously, when it comes to a marriage or the birth of a child, I don't consider myself to be a very important part, even if they met on on a message board about my work. It could have been anybody else. It could have been George R. Martin. It could have been any number of people. I don't take personal credit for it, but it is very nice. It's a nice experience. Anyway, so I'm going to continue reading Otherland, City of Golden Shadow, first volume. And what's happened is that Rini, along with Jeremiah Deco, who was Susan Van Bleek's helpmate, butler, chauffeur, whatever, caretaker, assistant, and her father, of course, Long Joseph, and Kabu, the son Bushman, along with Martine Desrubins, who is the researcher who is with them remotely. She's not there physically, but she is with them, along with a man named Singh, a hacker named Singh, who worked on the original Otherland. And they are all more or less coming together to find a place for Rini and her father and Kabu to essentially go to ground and try and solve the Otherland mystery. And Martine has tracked down this place, which is a decommissioned, pilotless airplane and air vehicle research facility the South African military owned, which has been unused for years. And they're trying to get inside of it. And they have just managed to hack the front door. The big, you can imagine this is a military installation. So this is not a front door like with a little turny knob or something like that. This is a massive metal blast door, but they have managed to hack their way in. And so they're driving in Susan Van Bleek's car, the car that used to be hers when she was alive, which is how they've gotten to this place up in the Drakensberg Mountains. So that's where we're at. I continue. Just do not attempt to turn anything on, said Martine. If there is still equipment here, even lights, electricity may still be connected also. But that's what we want, isn't it? Rini was waiting impatiently for Kabu, who was kneeling beneath the overhang, using her lighter to set fire to a long stick with its tip wrapped in dry brush. I mean, we are looking for equipment, aren't we? We have to use the stuff, and I doubt any of it runs on good thoughts. We will solve that problem as soon as we can, Martine replied, a measure of strained attention in her voice. But think, if this is a decommissioned base, as my research tells me, then it will not attract attention. Will it not attract attention if it begins to draw power? Is that a risk you wish to take? Rini shook her head. You're right. We won't touch anything yet. She was ashamed of herself for not having thought of it. Shaka Zulu, indeed. I will lead. Kabu waved his makeshift torch. The rest follow in the car. But, Kabu, please, Rini. He kicked off his shoes and set them down in a dry spot on one side of the doorway, then rolled up his pants legs. There is little I have done so far to help. This is one thing I can do better than anyone here. Also, I am smallest and would be best at getting through tight spots. Of course, you're right, she sighed. It seemed everyone was having better ideas than she was. Just be very, very careful, Kabu. Don't go out of our sight. I mean that. He smiled. Of course. As she watched Kabu move forward through the gaping emptiness of the doorway, a tremor of unease ran up Rini's spine. He looked like some ancient warrior going down into the dragon's den. Where were they going? What were they doing? Just a few short months ago, this flight and break-in would have seemed incomprehensible madness. Jeremiah started the car and drove forward behind him, easing through the entrance. The headlights met nothing but murky emptiness. If Kabu had not been standing a few meters ahead of them, torch held high, Rini would have feared they were about to drive over the edge of some bottomless pit. Kabu raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He walked forward a little way, torch swinging as he looked from side to side, up and down. Then he turned and jogged back. Rini leaned out of the window. What is it? The little man smiled. I think you can drive forward safely. Look. He held his torch near the ground. Rini stretched so she could look down. By the flickering light, she could see a broad white arrow and the upside-down word, stop. It is a parking lot, Kabu said. He lifted the torch high. See? There are more levels going up. Rini sat back in her seat. Beyond the headlights, the ramps led up into greater darkness. The lot was vast and absolutely empty. I suppose we won't have to worry much about finding a space, she said. After hauling in a sufficient amount of firewood, and much against both Jeremiah's and Long Joseph's wishes, Rini connected Segar Singh through her pad to the control panel on the inside of the lot, so that he could close the great door. If someone should happen to discover them, she wanted every bit of protection the government's bomb-proof defenses could provide. I'm going to download the instructions for opening it again to your pad's memory right now, Singh said. Because as soon as that door closes, you're going to lose me. If that's a hardened military site, an ordinary car phone connection isn't going to pass even a whisper out of there. There's a locked elevator with a different kind of code box on it, she told the old hacker. I think it goes down to the rest of the installation. Can you get that open too? Not tonight. Jesus, let me get some rest, will you? It's not like I don't have anything else to do but play electronic butler for you lot. She thanked him, then said goodbye to Martine as well, promising to open the door to make contact in 12 hours. Singh lowered the great slab. As it ground down, his beaky face on the screen dissolved into a flurry of electronic snow. Rini and her friends were cut off. Kabu had a large fire burning, and he and Jeremiah were preparing some of the food they had picked up in the morning, making a stew of inexpensive vat-grown beef and vegetables. Torch in hand, Long Joseph was wandering around the more distant parts of the huge underground lot, which made Rini nervous. Just watch out for loose concrete, or unmarked stairwells, or things like that, she called to him. He turned and gave her a look she could not quite make out by firelight, but which she assumed was disgusted. The shadowed ceiling was so high and the lot so broad that he seemed to stand far away across a flat desert. For a moment her perspective flipped, and instead of inside, they were outside, so completely outside that there were no walls anywhere. The sensation was dizzying. She had to put her hands down on the cool concrete to steady herself. "This is a good fire," Kabu declared. The others, used to a larger selection of amenities, stared at him glumly. The meal had been satisfactory, and for a while Rini had been able to ignore their situation and almost enjoy herself as if they were simply camping, but that had not lasted long. Kabu studied his companion's expressions. "I think it would be a good time to tell a story," he said suddenly. "I know one that seems appropriate." Rini broke the subsequent silence. "Please, tell it." "It is a story of despair and what overcomes it. I think it is a good story to tell on this night, when friends are together around the fire." He flashed his eye-wrinkling smile. "First, though, you must know a little bit about my people. I have told Rini stories already about old Grandfather Mantis and others of the early race. The stories are of long ago, of a time when all animals were people, and Grandfather Mantis himself still walked the earth. But this is one story that is not about him. The men of my people are hunters, or were, since there are almost none left who live in the old way. My father himself was a hunter, a desert bushman, and it was his pursuit of an eland that led him out of the land he knew to my mother. I have told Rini that story, and I will not tell it again tonight. But when the men of my people went out to hunt, often they had to travel far from their women and children to find game. The greatest hunters of all, though, are the stars up in the sky. My people watched them crossing the sky at night and knew that the bushmen were not the only ones who must travel long and far through difficult places. And the mightiest of all those great hunters is the one that you call the morning star, but we call the heart of dawn. He is the most tireless tracker in all the world, and his spear flies farther and more swiftly than any other. Back in the ancient days, the heart of dawn wished to take a wife. All the people of the early race brought their daughters in hopes that the greatest hunter of all would pick one for his bride. Elephant and python, springbok and long-nosed mouse all danced before him, but none spoke to his heart. Of the cats, the lioness was too large, the she-leopard covered with blotches. He solemnly dismissed them all one at a time, until his eyes fell upon the lynx. She was like a flame to him, with her bright coat and her ears like the glimmering tongues of fire. He felt that she, of all those who had passed before him, was the one that he should marry. When her father agreed to Heart of Dawn's request, as of course he did, there was a feast and dancing and singing. All the people of the early race came. There was some jealousy among those whose daughters were not chosen, but food and music helped to ease that evil in most hearts. The only one who did not join in the celebration was Hyena, from whose daughter the Heart of Dawn had turned away. Hyena was proud, and so was his daughter, They felt themselves to be insulted. Once they were married, Heart of Dawn came to love his lynx more and more. She conceived a child, and soon a son was born to them. In his joy with his new wife, the great hunter brought her back fine things from his journeys in the sky: earrings, bracelets for her arms and ankles, and a beautiful cape made of hide. And she wore them with happiness, since she was a proper married woman, and so did not leave her fire at night while her husband was away hunting across the sky. Her young sister came to visit with her. Together they spoke and laughed and played with Lynx's baby son while they awaited Heart of Dawn's return. But Hyena and his daughter still felt anger sour in their stomachs. And so old Hyena, who was cunning beyond almost any other, sent his daughter in secret to the camp of Lynx and Heart of Dawn. There was a food, ant eggs, that Lynx enjoyed more than any other. If she had any fault, it was that she was a little greedy, since before she had married Heart of Dawn she had often been hungry, and always when she found the sweet white eggs, which looked like grains of rice, she would eat them all. Knowing this, Hyena's daughter gathered a pile of ant eggs to leave where Lynx would find them. But first she took her own musk, the perspiration from her armpit, and mixed it with them. Then Hyena's daughter left the eggs and hid herself. Lynx and her sister were foraging for food when Lynx came upon the pile of ant eggs. "Oh," she cried, "here is a good thing! Here is a good thing!" But her sister was suspicious and said, "There is something foul-smelling about this food. I do not think it is good to eat." But Lynx was too excited. "I must eat them," she said, picking up all the ant eggs, "because the time might be long until I find such a thing again." Lynx's sister, though, would not eat any of the eggs because the smell of Hyena's daughter's musk was troubling to her. When they arrived back at camp, Lynx began to feel a pain in her belly, and her head grew hot as though she leaned too near a fire. She could not sleep that night or the next. Her sister scolded her for being greedy and brought their mother to help, but the old woman could do nothing, and Lynx became sicker and sicker. She pushed away her young son. She cried and vomited, and her eyes rolled up in her head. One by one, her beautiful ornaments began to fall away and drop to the ground. First her earrings, then her arm bracelets and her ankle bracelets, her cape of hide, even the leather thongs of her sandals, until she lay naked and weeping. At that moment, Lynx stood up and ran away into the darkness. Lynx's mother was so terrified that she ran back to her own camp to tell her husband that their daughter was dying. But her sister followed Lynx where she fled. When the camp was empty, Hyena's daughter entered into it from the dark night beyond the firelight. First, she put on Lynx's fallen earrings. Then she picked up and donned her ostrich shell bracelets and her cape of hide, even her sandals. When she had done this, Hyena's daughter sat down beside the fire and laughed, saying, "Now I am Heart of Dawn's wife, as I should have been." Lynx fled into the bush, and her sister followed her. In her unhappiness, Lynx ran until she came to a place of reeds and water, and there she sat, weeping and crying out. Her sister came to her and called, "Why do you not come back to your home? What if your husband returns and you are not beside the fire? Will he not fear for you?" But Lynx only went farther back into the reeds until she was standing knee-deep in the water and said, "I feel the spirit of the hyena in me. I am lonely and afraid, and the darkness has fallen on me." Because of what happened to Lynx, my people still say the time of the hyena is upon someone when that person's spirit is ill. Lynx's sister held forth Lynx's son and said, "Your baby wants to suckle. Look, he's hungry. You must give him your breast." And for a little while, Lynx was persuaded to come and suckle her baby, but then she put him down and fled back into the water this time, deeper, so that it reached her waist. Each time her sister persuaded her to come out and nurse her baby, Lynx held her son for a shorter time. And each time she retreated to the water she went in, deeper, until the water was almost to her mouth. At last, Lynx's sister went away in sorrow, taking the baby boy back to the fireside to be warmed, for it was cold beneath the night sky and colder where the reeds grew. But when she approached the camp, she saw a person with glowing eyes sitting at the fire, dressed in all of Lynx's clothes and ornaments. "Ah," said this person, "there is my baby son. Why have you stolen him? Give him to me now." For a moment, Lynx's sister was amazed, thinking that it was her sister returned from the reeds and the water. But then she smelled the stink of hyena and was fearful. She held the boy tightly in her arms and ran away from the fire, while Hyena's daughter howled after her, "Bring back my child! I am the wife of Heart of Dawn." Lynx's sister knew then what had happened, and knew that by the time her brother-in-law returned from his long journey across the sky, it would be too late to save her sister. She went to a high place and lifted her head to the dark night and began to sing. "Heart of dawn, hear me, hear me. Heart of dawn, come back from your hunt. Your wife is ill, your child is hungry. Heart of dawn, this is a bad time." She sang this over and over, louder and louder, until at last the great hunter heard her. He came rushing back across the sky, eyes flashing, until he stood before Lynx's sister. She told him everything that had happened, and he grew furiously angry. He ran to his camp. When he got there, Hyena's daughter stood up, her stolen earrings and bracelets tinkling. She tried to make her deep growling voice sweet like Lynx's as she said to him, "Husband, you have returned, and what have you brought back for your wife? Have you brought game? Have you brought gifts?" "Only one gift have I brought you, and this is it," said Heart of Dawn, flinging his spear. The she-hyena shrieked and sprang away, and the spear missed her. And the spear missed her. The only time Heart of Dawn ever missed his cast, for the hyena magic is old and very strong. But as she dodged it, she stepped into the fire.
and the coals burnt her legs, which made her shriek even louder. She cast aside Lynx's stolen belongings and ran away as swiftly as she could, limping from the pain of her burns. And if you see a hyena today, you will see that he walks as though his feet are tender, as do all the offspring of hyena's daughter, and that his legs are still blackened from Heart of Dawn's fire. And so, when the hunter had driven the interloper away, he went to the place of waters and brought his wife out again, and gave her back her ornaments and clothing, and placed her young son in her arms once more. Then, with Lynx's sister beside them, they returned to their camp. And now, when the morning star we call Heart of Dawn returns from his hunting, he always comes swiftly, and even the dark night runs from him. When he appears, you can see night flee along the horizon, the red dust rising up from his heels. And that is the end of my story. All was silent after the small man had finished. Jeremiah slowly nodded his head as though he had heard something confirmed that he had long believed. Long Joseph was nodding too, but for a different reason. He had dozed off. "That was wonderful," Rini said at last. Kabu's tale had seemed oddly vivid, yet familiar too, as though she had heard parts of it before, although she knew she had not. "That was. It reminded me of so many things." "I am glad you heard it. I hope you'll remember it when you are unhappy. We all must pray for the kindness of others to give us strength." For a moment the glow of the fire seemed to fill the room, pushing the shadows back. Rini allowed herself the luxury of a little hope. She stared down over a broad, night-blotted desert from above. Whether she sat in the branches of a tree or on the steps of a hillside, she could not tell. People perched on every side of her, although she could barely see them. "I'm glad you've come to stay in my house," said Susan Van Bleek from the darkness beside her. "It's too high in the air, of course. Sometimes I worry that everyone will fall off." "But I can't stay." Rini was afraid of hurting Susan's feelings, but she knew it had to be said. I have to go and take Stephen his school things. Papa will be angry if I don't." She felt a dry, bony hand close on her wrist. "Oh, but you can't leave. He is out there, you know." "He is?" Rini felt a mounting agitation. "But I have to go across. I have to take Stephen his books for school." The idea of her brother waiting for her, alone and crying, vied with the dreadful import of the doctor's words. She only vaguely knew what or who Susan meant, but she knew what it signified was bad. "Of course he is. He smells us." The grip on Rini's arm tightened. "He hates us because we're up here and because we're warm when he's so cold." Even as the doctor spoke, Rini felt something, a spike of chill wind coming in off the desert. The other near invisible shapes felt it too, and there was a rush of frightened whispering. "But I can't stay here. Stephen is out there on the other side." "But you can't go down there either." The doctor's voice seemed different now, and so did her smell. "He is waiting. I told you. He's always waiting because he's always on the outside." It was not the doctor sitting beside her in the darkness. It was her mother. Rini recognized her voice and the scent of the lemony perfume she had liked to wear. "Mama?" There was no reply, but she could feel her mother's warmth only a few inches away. As Rini began to speak again, she sensed something new, something that froze her with fear. Something was out there, prowling in the darkness beneath them, snuffling for something to devour. Silence, her mother hissed. He is very close, child. A stink rose toward them, a strange, chilly smell of dead things and old, once burnt things and musty, deserted places. With the smell came a feeling, as strong and clear to Rini's senses as the stench, a tangible wave of wretched evil, of jealousy and gnawing hatred and misery and utter, utter loneliness. The emanation from something that had been consigned to darkness since before time itself began, and which knew nothing of the light except that it hated it. Rini suddenly did not want to ever leave that high place. Mama, she began, I need to. Suddenly her feet slipped out from beneath her, and she was plummeting helplessly into blackness, falling, falling, and the wretched, hateful, powerful thing below her was opening its great foul jaws. Rini sat up, gasping, her blood pounding in her ears. For a long moment she did not know where she was. When she remembered, it was not much better. Exiled, fugitive, driven into a strange and unknown land. The last sensation of the dream, of falling toward a waiting evil, had not entirely left her. She felt sickened and her skin was stippled with goose flesh. The time of the hyena, she thought, tempted toward despair. Like Kabu said, and it's really here. It was hard even to lie back down, but she forced herself. The regular breathing of the others, which floated and echoed in the great darkness above her, was her only link to the light. You mean we could have had the electricity on last night? Long Joseph thrust his hands in his pockets and leaned forward. Instead of sitting around some fire? The power is on, yes. Rini was frustrated at having to explain again. It's power for the building to do self-maintenance and for the security systems, but that doesn't mean we should use it any more than we have to. I hurt my foot trying to find a toilet in the dark. I could have fallen down some hole and broke my neck. Look, Papa, she began, then stopped. Why did she keep fighting the same battles? She turned and walked across the wide cement floor toward the elevators. How is it going? She asked. Kabu looked up. Mr. Singh is still working. 6 hours, said Jeremiah. We aren't ever going to get this thing open. I didn't expect to spend the rest of my life in a bloody parking garage. Singh's voice buzzed from the pad, compressed to a fraction of the usual bandwidth. Jesus, all you lot do is complain. Just be grateful that this place has been shut down or decommissioned or whatever the hell you call it. It could have been a damn sight harder to get in it than it was. Not to mention the lack of armed guards, which certainly would have added to the difficulty. He sounded more hurt than angry, perhaps at having his abilities questioned. I'll get it eventually, but these are the original palm print readers. Those are quite a bit tougher to crack than a simple code system. I know, Rini said, and we're grateful. It's been difficult, that's all. The last few days have been stressful. Stressful? The old man's voice took on an offended tone. You should try to break into the world's most carefully guarded network with a nurse coming in every few minutes to check your bedpan or insist you finish your rice pudding. And there aren't any locks on the doors in the goddamn place, so I've got senile old bastards pushing in on me all the time because they think it's their own room. Not to mention I have gastric pains like you wouldn't believe from the medication I'm on. And meanwhile, I'm just trying to get you past the security system of a top secret military base. I'll tell you about stressful. Thoroughly rebuked, Renee walked away. Her head hurt, and she was out of pain blockers. She lit a cigarette, although she didn't really want one. No one is happy today, Kabu said quietly. Renee jumped. She hadn't heard him approach. What about you? You seem happy enough. Enough. Kabu's look was tinged with sad amusement. Renee felt a tug of guilt at the sharpness of her response. Of course I am not happy, Renee. I am unhappy because of what has happened to you and your family. I am unhappy because I cannot go forward with the thing I wish to do most in all the world. And I am fearful that we have discovered something truly dangerous, as I have told you, and that it is beyond our powers to do anything about it. But being angry will not help us, at least not now. He smiled a little, and his eyes crinkled at the corners. Perhaps later, when things are better, I will be angry. She was again grateful for his calm good nature, but with that gratitude came a small mote of resentment. His even disposition made her feel she was being forgiven time after time, and she did not like being forgiven for anything. When things are better, are you sure that things will ever be better? He shrugged. It is a matter of words. In my birth language, there are more ifs than whens, but I must make a choice every time I speak a sentence in English. I try to choose the happier way of saying things so that my own words will not weigh me down like stones. Does that make sense? I think so. Rini! Jeremiah sounded alarmed. She turned in time to see the light flash above one of the elevators. A moment later, the door slid open. It's like being that explorer, Rini thought as the elevator stopped noiselessly on the first level down. The one who discovered the Pharaoh's lost tomb. Her next thought, a disconcerting memory of a curse that had supposedly killed the discoverer, was interrupted, but not banished, by the hiss of the opening door. It had only been a suite of offices and was now empty of furniture except for a large conference table and some big file cabinets whose drawers gaped, fileless. Reenie's heart sank. The place's bare-bone condition did not bode well. She and the others walked through all the rooms on the floor, making certain there was nothing more useful in any of them, then got back into the elevator. 3 more levels of similarly stripped offices did not improve her state of mind. There were enough large pieces of furniture to suggest that the decommissioning had ground to a halt at some point, but the empty warrens contained nothing of real value. There were a few eerie reminders that this place had once been a living environment. A couple of calendars, almost 2 decades old, still hanging on walls, antique announcements about this or that function or rules change, yellowed on bulletin boards, even a photo taped to an office window of a woman and children, all dressed in tribal costumes as though for some ceremony. But they only made the place seem more deserted, more dead. The floor below was full of stainless steel counters that made Reenie think uncomfortably of a pathologist's examining room until she realized that this had been the kitchen. A large, empty room stacked high with folding tables confirmed the guess. The next 2 floors contained cubicles she guessed had been dormitories, empty now, like the cells of a long unused beehive. People lived here? Jeremiah asked. Some probably did. Renee picked up her pad and sent the elevator down again. Or they may have just had the facilities ready in case of war, but never used them. Martin said this place was some kind of special Air Force installation. This is the last floor, her father observed, somewhat needlessly since the buttons on the elevator wall were easy to count. And there isn't anything above where we came in, but two more floors of parking lot, like I told you. I looked. He sounded almost cheerful. Rini caught Kabu's eye. The little man's expression did not change, but he held her gaze as if to send her strength. He doesn't think there's anything here either. She felt a sense of unreality wash over her. Or maybe it was reality. What had they expected, after all? A complete, functioning, high-tech military base left for them like some magical castle under a spell? The elevator door pulled back. Rini didn't even need to look, and her father's words held no surprises. Just some more offices. Looks like some kind of big meeting room over there. She took a breath. Let's walk through them anyway. It can't hurt. Feeling more and more as if she were caught in a particularly tiresome and depressing dream, she led them out into the sectioned space. She stood staring as the others wandered off in separate directions. This first room had been stripped to the walls, everything taken except the ugly institutional beige carpet. In her miserable state of mind, she could not help thinking about how hellish it must have been to work in this windowless place, breathing canned air, knowing you were sunk beneath 1,000,000 tons of stone. She turned in disgust to head back to the elevator, too flatly miserable even to think about what they might do next. There is another elevator, Kabu called. It took a moment to sink in. What? Another elevator, here in the far corner. Rini and the others made their way through the labyrinth and stood and gaped at the very ordinary-looking elevator, as though it were a landed UFO. Is it another one down from the entrance? Rini asked, not willing to reach out for hope again. There weren't any on this wall, girl, said Long Joseph. He's right. Jeremiah reached out and carefully touched the door. Rini ran back to unhook her pad from the other elevator. There were no buttons inside the matte gray box, and at first the door would not even close again. She rehooked the pad to the inside hand reader and keyed in Singh's code sequence. A moment later, the doors shut. The car traveled down for a surprisingly long time. Then the doors pinged open. Oh, my Lord, said Jeremiah. Look at this place. Rini blinked. It was the Pharaoh's tomb. Long Joseph suddenly laughed. I see it. They built this damn place first. Then they built the rest of the damn thing on top of it. They couldn't get this stuff out of here without blowing up the damned mountain. Kabu had already stepped forward. Rini followed him. The ceiling was 5 times as high as that of the garage. A great vault of natural stone hung with scores of boxy light fixtures, each the size of a double bed. These were slowly smoldering into a yellowish half-light, as though someone had turned them on to honor the visitors. The walls were ringed with several tiers of offices, which appeared to have been cut into the living rock, fenced with catwalks. Rini and the others stood on the third up from the bottom of the cavern, looking down to the floor at least a dozen meters below. Banks of equipment, many covered with plastic sheets, were arrayed all around the floor, although there were gaps where things were obviously missing. Cables hung like tightened cobwebs from a grid of troughs. And at the center of the room, massive and strange as the sarcophagi of dead god kings, lay 12 huge ceramic coffins. And that's the end of that chapter, but I think I'm going to read a little tiny bit of the next one because we've got 5 minutes left. Chapter 28, A Visit to Uncle. Netfeed News, UN fears new Bukavu strain. Visual, Ghanaian Bukavu victims stacked outside Accra hospital. Voiceover, UN Med field workers are reporting a possible new variant of the Bukavu virus. The new strain, already unofficially called Bukavu 5, has a longer dormancy period, which enables carriers to spread the disease more widely than those infected with Bukavu 4, which kills in 2 to 3 days. Visual, UN Med Chief Officer Injinye at news conference. Injinye, these viruses are mutating very swiftly. We are fighting a series of epidemiological brushfires across Africa and the Indian subcontinent. So far, we have managed to keep these conflagrations under control, but without better resources, a larger breakout seems inevitable. A man was being buried alive out in the courtyard, thumping frantically on the inside of his casket as dirt rained down on the lid. In the upper reaches of the vaulted ceiling, a huge, shaggy, spider-like creature was wrapping another customer in webbing that, judging by the shrieks of the victim, burned like acid. It was all very, very boring. Orlando thought even the house skeletons looked a little slow and tired. As he watched, the small squadron performing maneuvers on his tabletop failed in their attempt to shift the virtual sugar bowl. It rolled over, crushing a dozen of them into tiny simulated bone fragments. Orlando didn't even smile. Fredericks wasn't here. None of the other Last Chance Saloon regulars could remember seeing him since the last time the two of them had been in together. Orlando moved on. His friend wasn't in any of the other Terminal Row establishments either, although someone in the living end said she thought she'd seen him recently. But since this particular witness was nicknamed Vaporhead, Orlando didn't put much store in the sighting. He was more than a little worried. He had left several messages over the last week, directly to Frederick's account and with mutual friends, but Fredericks hadn't responded to any of them, or even picked any of them up. Orlando had assumed that Fredericks, like himself, had been tumbled out of Treehouse at the end of their sojourn there and back into his normal life. That his friend was just being quiet because he was mad at Orlando for dragging him into this latest obsession. Now he was beginning to wonder if something more serious might be going on. Orlando shifted again, this time to the middle country. But instead of the Garrote and Dirk, in ancient Madricor's thieves' quarter, his usual entry point for new adventures, he found himself on a vast stone staircase, facing a massive pair of wooden doors decorated with a pair of Titan scales. Temple of the Table of Judgment, he thought. Wow, that was a quick deliberation. The doors opened and the torch flames leaped in the wall sconces. Orlando, now wearing his familiar Thargor sim, walked forward. Despite his current disaffection, it was hard not to respond to the gravity of the occasion. The high-ceilinged room was all in shadow but for a single column of light that angled down from the stained glass window. The window was also decorated with the Table of Judgment crest, and the light spilling through it perfectly illuminated the masked and robed figures sitting in the circle below. Even the stone walls looked convincingly old and impressive, smoothed by the passage of centuries. By the way, I'm going to be done in about 2 minutes, so just to let you know if you're on a tight schedule. Despite having seen it all before, Orlando found himself admiring all the work that had gone into it. That was the reason he had always played the Middle Country exclusively. The people who built and owned it were gamers and artists, not slave labor hired by a corporation. They wanted it right because they wanted to hang out in it themselves. One of the figures rose and spoke in a firm, clear voice. Thargor, your appeal has been considered. We are all aware of your history and have admired your feats of daring. We also know you to be a competitor who does not lightly ask for the table's intervention. There was a pause. All of the faces were turned toward him, unreadable beneath the cloth masks. However, we cannot find merit in your appeal. Thargor, your death is ruled lawful. Can I get access to the records you used in your deliberation? Orlando asked, but the masked figure did not even pause. After a moment, Orlando realized that the entire judgment was recorded. We are sure that with your skills you will return to the Middle Country in another guise and make a new name famous throughout the land. But those who revere the history of the Middle Country will never forget Thargor. Good luck. You have heard the decision of the Table of Judgment. The temple vanished before Orlando could say anything. An instant later, he was in the fitting room, the place where new characters purchased attributes and literally built themselves before entering the Middle Country. He stood staring around, but not really seeing. He felt some pain, but surprisingly little. Thargor was definitely dead. After all the time he had spent being Thargor, it should have meant more than it did. "Oh, it's you, gardener," said the attendant priest. "Heard about Thargor getting toasted. Really sorry, but we all gotta go sometime, I guess. What are you gonna do now? Another warrior type, or maybe something different? A wizard?" Orlando snorted in disgust. "Listen, can you find out if Pithlet the thief has been in lately?" The priest shook his head. "I'm not allowed to do that. Can't you leave him a message?" "I've tried," Orlando sighed. "Doesn't matter. See you around." "Huh? Aren't you going to refit yourself? Man, people are out there jockeying for your spot at the top, gardener. Dieter Cabo's already put out an open challenge to all comers. He just needs a few points to jump into your old place." With only the smallest twinge of remorse, Orlando left the Middle Country. And that is where we are going to stop. So, with that, I say, again, so many thanks to you for joining me. I will be back tomorrow, well, today, 7 p.m., and then, of course, next weekend, same TAD time, same TAD channel, 1 a.m., this slot as always. I hope those of you out there who are having nice weather, and hello, Sonia. I saw you just showed up and said hello. Those of you out there who are having nice weather in your parts of England or Germany or wherever you may be, go out and enjoy it. And thank you for spending part of it with me. For those of you in my neck of the woods, go to bed. Jeez Louise, it's late. And I will, in a little while, do the same. So thanks once again for joining me. It's a great pleasure as always. Y'all be good. I'll see you real soon. Thank you. Bye.